take out the linens for me? You see it right around by the bin? Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Ay, mi amor, you're so awesome today.
Hey, Alejandro, who is this?
Oh, it's Jesus. He's new. He's a friend of my cousin. He's been here all night.
Oh. Hey, nice to meet you, baby. All right.
Welcome to the channel. This is Gene Micofsky. We are here to discuss my score to Heart of Texas. And with me today, I have the percussionist extreme, Anthony Dibartolo. Welcome, Fal.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This will be fun.
Yeah. So I'm gonna kind of be, this is my first time doing this for this movie, and so you're the first one I'm gonna talk to. And I mean, you are the featured instrumentalist on the score. So you're front build here. So I'm gonna front load this with just like my a little bit of history of how I know you, and then I want to ask you some questions and stuff like that. So first off, for those that know, I grew up on the East Coast and I was in Jersey for a long time doing the cover bar scene and playing in bands and stuff. And so one of my good friends, Dave DeLizza, is a composer. We went to school together and he was in bands and stuff like that. And so Anthony was a guy that I just knew, in the scene, but we weren't like good friends. He was just kind of a passerby. And I was like, oh, I want to get to know that guy one day. Never really happened, but I always kind of admired his work from afar. And if you are familiar with the Jersey scene, there's not like a ton of percussionists that make their mark in the classical and avant-garde world. And over the years, Dave would send me videos of Anthony doing his thing, and I was like, oh my God, one day I got to get this guy to do this for me on a score. And so fast forward to present day, I get asked to do Heart of Texas with Gregory Kasnick, who I've been collaborating with since 2007 or 8 or something like that. It's been a long, long time. And it's something that he and I always talk about is we always want to feature something. So, each score has something special. The last one we did had a lot of cello. And this one, percussion came up. And the first thing popped in my mind, I was like, I got to call Anthony. Um, so here we are. And I want to
Thanks.
talk about you briefly. I want to talk about your work, what your expertise and interests are, some of the things that you do, because what you do over in Jersey is really interesting. And then I want to talk about how we did the score and what you did and all that. So start off by, I just want to know like your history and how did you get into classical percussion? Because that is a niche, like most people just play drums and then they get into bands or something, but not a lot of people do what you do. So can we start there?
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, I started playing, drum set. That was like my bag growing up. But I always listened to a lot of jazz, so like improvisation was definitely not, something that was foreign to me. And so, kind of when I got to college age, was when I really started becoming interested in classical percussion specifically. And then beyond that, after being classically trained and learning, not just the drum set, but also, being able to play timpani and marimba and all the other mallet percussion. But in specifically my undergrad, within that program, we kind of dove into the avant-garde scene a lot, and we played, Christian Wolff, and we played Varese, and we played all kinds of other new music and commissioned works, and it was just such an interesting field to me. Just not playing not only just drum set and all the other really important percussion instruments, but then, what else is sound and what is important to that world. Even diving into obviously John Cage was such a big influence on me at those young, years. And so figuring out really interesting sounds, and how I could kind of morph that into not only improvised music, but even music that was fully notated, was really interesting to me. And then on top of that, as a percussionist, naturally, our only connection to the instrument is a stick, right? Or some sort of implement. So beyond that, it's kind of like you have to be so specific on, when a composer asks for a specific sound, not only, yeah, I can pull a pair of cymbals out, but, which one is right for this piece, or which mallet is the right implement and tool to make the sound that is being requested. So like I kind of went down the rabbit hole with that, even years later after my grad work, where it was just like, how can I stretch what is a sound even more? So, fast forward a few more years, and I did a lot of experiments with electronics, and kind of, again, pushing the boundaries of like typical found sounds, and trying to find, like things that are just not used a lot. So I think, starting off just as a percussionist helps with that exploration. It's like always like being a kid. I watch my kids like explore their areas, and like everything they find is like the coolest thing they've ever seen. And that's kind of like how I like to choose instruments. Is like I'm just going around trying to pick the coolest sounds, and then like, well, what if I hit it with this, or what if I strike it on this side as opposed to the standard way of playing it, and just trying to make the sound that is the most interesting. And I've been really lucky to be called for this, and just kind of work with really good composers like yourself, and try and push the boundary, and make these sounds like kind of put them in the spotlight.
Right. And so one thing I wanted to highlight too is your work in the orchestral world, because that was something that I guess happens in this past 2 years.
Yeah,
Uh,
2 years. Yeah.
so I was hoping you could talk about doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, I feel like there aren't a ton of percussionists that, can do the avant-garde thing, and or maybe not that they can't do it, but it's like maybe not as interested in that, because while you go down the path of like being a orchestral percussionist, I mean, it takes so much time and energy to devote to that, and there's only so much time you can use to practice, but because I have a lot of different interests, and I gig in all different realms, it was kind of like a goal of mine to try and get higher level gigs in all these different fields. So like in the new music and avant-garde stuff, I've played with several contemporary groups, like Glass Farm Ensemble. I was a core member in New York. And we did tours, and then here in Philly area, playing with like the avant rock guitarist Nick Millivoy and like Desertion Trio, playing opening for his band. And then, in the orchestral world, I recently won the Allentown Symphony Orchestra principal percussion job. And, it's just like, there are just more and more avenues, I think, like to use cool percussion and percussive sounds, even though that route is, audition based. And so you have to play the standard repertoire. But like once you get the job, I mean, I had the really amazing opportunity over the past year to work with the great contemporary composer Clarice Assad, and her music has so much flexibility. And I remember last year premiering one of her new pieces, Circus Fantasia, and she was asking for clown horns and asking for all these different beautiful sounds, and was so gracious, like when I just brought a million different sounds to the table and these different whistles and everything, and I ended up using some like dog squeakers, and like I mean I had everything out there, but so like being able to apply this kind of interest to a lot of different ways is really cool for
Well,
me.
you mentioned Varese, and Varese was a big one for me coming up, in college as a comp student. Ionization was the one, they're like, you got to know this piece. And so,
Yeah.
talking about Heart of Texas, what we did wasn't necessarily as wild as that. I think it's more in the groove zone. But I guess it's a good time to kind of veer into the score and how we did
Yeah.
it, and the conversation that we had. Um, because your parts are not written. A lot of times I write for people and I'm like, play this thing. And for those that don't do scores, Sometimes you write parts for players, and sometimes you hire a person because they've got that magic thing, and you want them to just explore it and without you tampering, and so you get sort of a unique identity and flavor. So when I called you, I believe the way this happened was Gregor had a temp piece in there, so he knew that like he knew there was going to be percussion in the diner scene, and it needs to capture sort of the calamity of working in a diner, especially knowing when you're about to get your big break and you got to get out of there, you know. So, but the one thing I remember talking to you about, I was very poignant about this. I was like, I don't want it to be Latin. I remember the 10 piece was a Latin thing, and and it had a boom, da dum, da dum, kind of feel to it. I said, okay, we're definitely not doing that. It's more going to be straight ahead. And so I remember coming to your house. Actually, you flew to the East Coast, and we just sat in your room. I believe it's the room you're in right now.
It's right here. Yeah.
And I have to say, like for me, that's like the ultimate playtime when you get to just like watch somebody tink and tank on these weird little things and say yes, that, not that. And so I remember a part of the conversation was you just kind of showing me the toys, and then I would say yes, this, no, that, And so to my memory, if I'm serves me correct, I said I wanted a foundation of kind of basic instruments, like stuff that you recognize, which was like the kick, the floor toms, that kind of stuff, basic like drum kit stuff. And then I wanted a couple layers of things where the audience would say, "What is that?" That's the best thing that percussion could do, where you put that little extra something on the top. And I think my favorite one is the spring. There's a
Oh
metal
yeah.
spring. I guess, is it like a car piece? Is that what it
It
was?
is. Yeah, it's a suspension spring. Yeah.
That's good.
And it took me so long to power wash that thing to get it clean. Because otherwise I couldn't use it, man. It was like getting like stuff
Yeah.
everywhere in my studio. Yeah, so that
So
was like straight off of a car.
it's so great. So yeah, well, let me know. I might need one soon. So let me if you're done with it.
Yeah, man.
So um, yeah, I wanted to talk about the two cues that you did in the film because they're predominantly you. It's me directing and me editing parts, but it's predominantly your performances. And so I wanted to start off by giving another shout to Dave DeLizza because he's not, in the age of sort of Spotify and all that stuff. The soundtrack came out, and there's not a whole lot of information. Like in the old days, it would have said engineered by, but Dave was kind enough to come over and record all these parts for us since we were working remote. And so, yeah, the thing I wanted to mention for the audience that I think is really cool is when we were in talks to do this thing. Gregory said, "Can you get Anthony just to do a little test for me? Just like I kind of want to hear some sounds." And and you did this thing because there was two pieces I was hoping that you could talk about it. There's two instruments in there. One I think is the spring. So this is the cop scene, and
Hmm.
so we see the cop. For those that haven't seen it, you'll see it soon. It is live this week now that we're in the Oscar push. Um, when you see the cop, there's this weird little percussion bit that I wanted to talk about because so Greg says, "Can you do a little demo?" And I was, "Yeah, sure, sure." So then you did this little thing and you sent it to us, and it was so great and so perfect that it just got popped in the movie as is. And it was one of those like when you read about bands and they're like they do the demo and they're like, "Yeah, but when we do the real thing, it's going to be great." And it was kind of like that, and it got popped in the movie. And it's there, like the demo is that cue of the movie, and it's so good that and the length, and that's like the wildest thing about it is the way you played it. I didn't touch it. I think I maybe copied a couple things to make it a little longer, but for the most part, we popped it in, and it was like, oh my gosh, this fits the scene as if you scored it. So it's super cool. But hoping you could talk about that cue.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I started off with like that. It was like a muffled bass drum, like Grand Casa. So I have this 30, or no, it's a 28-inch bass drum. Um, and yeah, I kind of started off with that as like a boom, pa, boom, pa. And I really was trying to just make a heartbeat sound, almost as if like, you're kind of waiting for something. And it's like, it's just like a visceral,
Very
visceral thing.
ominous. Yeah.
Yeah, but not that I even knew what the cue was going to be, because again, I was just doing this on my own. But I don't know what popped into my head. It was late. I was down actually again in this room, and I just remember it being like really late, and it was kind of like similar night to tonight, like rainy and dreary, and I'm like, I kind of want to make something dark and like a little bit scary. And so like that heartbeat always comes to mind, just like, that like, oh, what's going to happen next? So I started with that, and then I just started tinkering with things and layering. I know that there are several small pieces of metal. I think some of them are like pieces of like a tam that I had cut apart because somebody was getting rid of it and it was already like cracked and broken up. So I just took all these pieces out. I actually played an old bass drum, like just the head by itself to give some rhythm to it. And like use the Super Ball mallet, like the rubber mallet to drag. And that's when you hear like some of the really low, like,
That's the one sound I wanted to ask you to explain to people. It's like,
yeah.
sounds like a ship just like ran into a piece of metal and it's just dragging,
Yeah, yeah. And I kind of like close mic'd it too there so that you could really hear like just like that, like both the drag and the rumble coming from the drum. Trying to think what else. Oh, you know what? So just because when you came over, you were talking about, like this like element of groove. So I have like this backbeat going on, like 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And the 2 and 4, was actually on this like rosewood slapstick that just sounded cool because it doesn't sound like a traditional like sharp slapstick. It's like a little dark and a little bit pitched. So that was actually just it. I have a lot of effects on it, but like that's what the backbeat is there. So you can just kind of hear like that interplay between the low bass drum rumbles and those slapstick,
Yeah,
hits.
it's a spacious groove. I think what's
Yeah.
interesting. I think that's what provides that kind of unease about it, is that there is a groove, but it's not a fast one, and you just kind of sit it in. You're like, ooh, what's happening? Which is so
Yeah.
wild. Like I said, once again, like just the magic of how things kind of play out sometimes. Like you couldn't have possibly known how we were going to use it, but there it
Yeah.
is, and it's so perfect. So talk about the kitchen scene. Talk about putting that together. Um,
Yeah.
because like I said, my direction for you was unrecognizable sounds and then stuff that's going to be what's going on here?
Yeah. Well, after you guys told me that you used that the demo, I actually like kind of just to tie things together. I actually used some of those instruments. I think there was like a ceramic or no, a stone kind of pot that I used in that first take, and I think that one and some of the metal sounds, plus the spring added. And like, so I wanted to tie those two scenes together so it still sounded like it was like one voice, right? So I kind of started with that, and then I started going a little bit beyond that. So I had some clay pot bottoms and pavers and things like that are all in that same kind of similar like stone resonant like family. Plus the spring and the small metal pieces.
Are the small metal pieces the ticky tacky stuff? Because you have the traditional drums, dum dum da, 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 dum dum, right on the bottom, but there's a
Right.
thing that's going.
Yeah. And that actually was some more different flower pot y kind of stuff. We should probably put the picture up too. I have some pictures from this session so you can if you want to see like the exact setup. But like yeah, and there was one other high sound. I'm trying to remember what I used there, but it was almost like a bell tone. And I picked that instrument specifically because I was thinking of like, when an order is done, like a
Yeah.
ding, like,
Yes.
so like you kind of like, and I think like in the final
Oh, it's so
cut,
perfect. Yeah.
yeah, you can hear it like
And a
every
resurge.
once in a while. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just trying to like, find different sounds that, would just work for that. And that's why I thought some of the dings and dangs of like the ceramic almost remind me of like plates and things. And so like just thinking of a kitchen scene, like I really did go to that, to that kind of aesthetic, just to try and make it almost as if like the kitchen was talking, through the music. Now the drums, I pretty much just use like kick. I think it was kick, floor tom, and snare mostly. And that was like that most recognizable,
Yeah.
recognizable groovy, like kind of like
I believe I
back in my
had
like rock
two when
days.
I was editing these parts. I believe I had two layers of it. There was two separate drum passes which I worked off of. I think I pretty much used everything. So
Yeah.
it's all in there. I think I edited some gaps and I created some parts out of it, but it's all in there. So it's super cool.
Yeah, and that was actually another thing we should probably talk about that was kind of cool is like I gave you these stems just like here you go. And then
Yeah.
I didn't know what you were going to do with them and it just worked. It worked
It's
perfectly. I
one of my
mean,
favorite
really
things to
good.
do. I love making somebody do a thing, and then I mangle their parts, and then they have to live with the consequences, you know? I did an instrumental record where I did this with Morgan, who played cello on our last movie. There's a track. I'm drawing a blank on the title, but it's kind of like a Scottish name, something like that. And basically, he sent me a bunch of cello parts. And I took them in and I added guitar and bass to it, but I flipped them on their head rhythmically. So like the way the part is on the recording is absolutely not what he intended. And then he heard it and he was just like, how did you do that? What made you think of that? You know, it was like, who knows? This is less dramatic than that, obviously, but it is cool to see like how your stuff gets used because I mean, you I'm sure you know this. Like I've done a lot of session work too, where you go and you do your thing and you have no idea like how it's going to get used. And you're just like, well, hopefully they have taste.
Oh, the worst though is that when it doesn't actually show up at all. You do the session and then you
Yes.
listen back and you're like, "Oh wait, where's that really
Where's
cool
that
part I
great thing
did?"
I did?
Oh man.
Yeah. So
Yep.
fortunately for you, all the great things are here. This has been awesome. I think it's a good place to call it. So thank you so much. Thank you for your excellent music and performance. And hey, maybe we'll see this one at the Oscars this year because
Yeah.
in the running. So good things to come regardless. And yeah, for everyone that is new to this, go check out Heart of Texas and check out the score and let's talk about it. All right, Anthony, thank you so much.
Yeah,
And
thank you, Gene.
have a good night.
Yep, you too.